Okay, we're live on YouTube and I'm going to start letting folks in.
Okay. All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Research Bites. My name is Marilyn Willis, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, also known as CSRPC. The monthly Research Bites series is one of many programs that we've initiated to engage scholars, students, staff, and community members in interdisciplinary scholarship and programming around the topics of race and ethnicity. Our goal for this series is to connect staff from across the university with faculty affiliates of the center who study, teach, and write about race and ethnicity. We wanted to create an informal and interactive space where staff can learn firsthand about some of the exciting research happening on campus, as well as get to know more faculty. We also hope these gatherings provide an opportunity for faculty and staff to network with hopes of shared interest and possibilities for future collaborations. At any time, you can subscribe to our Research Bites and CSRPC listservs. A link will be provided in the chat later on throughout the conversation. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Selwyn O. Rogers Jr. Dr. Rogers, and I'm giving all of his letters behind his initials, MD, MPH, FACS, is a nationally recognized surgeon and public health expert. As founding director of the University of Chicago Medicine Trauma Center, he leads efforts to expand trauma care on the South Side through an interdisciplinary community-centered approach. Dr. Rogers has held leadership roles across the country, including Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at the University of Texas Medical Branch, Chair of Surgery at Temple University, and Division Chief at Harvard Medical School. At Brigham, at Brigham and Women's Hospital, he co-founded the Center for Surgery and Public Health. At the University of Chicago, he also serves as Executive Vice President for Community Health Engagement, advancing research and partnerships to address health disparities and improve outcomes for underserved populations. His work focuses on the impact of race, ethnicity, and social factors on surgical care. Please give a warm welcome to our friend and faculty member, Dr. Selwyn Rogers.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Ms. Willis. It's a pleasure to be here. I have had the opportunity to look at a number of the CSRPC research bites, and as so many people have noted, it's peppered at times with baby pictures and pictures of people when they're 3 years old and with their siblings and to get a sense of who we all are since we are all part of a community. And it's a pleasure to be part of this CSRPC community. But sadly, as a first generation American born in the United States Virgin Islands to a mom from Antigua and a dad from Anguilla, and growing up on the island of St. Croix during Hurricane Hugo, which was a devastating hurricane that damaged about 70% of homes, including our own. And the roof of our home was literally peeled off like the opening of a soup can. All of our family pictures were lost, and so we have none. And back in that time, I turned 60 this year. It's not like we had this a whole bunch of iPhone stuff. So a lot of my memories are memories that are here, and I hope that I don't develop any dementia because I want to keep those memories. I have about 45 minutes. I really look forward to this conversation. I think it's tough to do these things by Zoom, but I'll also say, as a seasoned lecturer, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or tell me something doesn't make sense, because I know where I'm going. You may not know where I'm going, but I know where I'm going, and you can't throw me off. But we can also hold questions for the end. So the talk is entitled "Strive for Equity in Trauma Care: The Power of Relationships." And as many people on this call may know, there's a history of trauma, or the absence of trauma care for adults in the South Side of Chicago. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the context of equity, and the work that's been going on here over the past 9 years since I arrived in Chicago, and then end with a little bit of focus on my values, what drives me, um, since I can't share baby pictures. So I have no financial disclosures related to this talk, but one thing that drives me is live music, especially jazz. I find jazz music, in particular, the improvisational nature of it, just outstanding, but I also see incredible true genius in jazz. And this is Miles Davis, quintessential jazz, probably arguably one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. And the album featured here is 1959's Kind of Blue, which is the biggest selling jazz album in recorded history. Miles Davis was a bad dude, but he also, when I say bad, I mean bad good, right? Slang, bad good. But he also was a bit of a character and had a lot of quips along the way of his journey. This one has always stuck with me. If you hit a wrong note, it's the next note that you play that determines if it's good or bad. So hold on to that note that I just shared, because there's a thread there. Just because you hit a wrong note, or what you think is a wrong note, any note actually depends on what came before and what came after. And it's the context that really does matter. So let me dive in. You can't really talk about equity and trauma care without talking about this kid's story. This is the great Benji Wilson, 18-year-old black male teenager, went to Simeon Rice, as you can see. Simeon Vocational School was what it was called back then. You can see his finger up. He was the #1 projected draft pick for the following year, 85, and he was a Michael Jordan of his time. The city of Chicago is, the home of Michael Jordan, but he was the original. And he Benji was this iconic crossover guy back in the early 80s, where the idea of positionless basketball was just being developed. And he was 6'8", 220. He was quick enough that he could play shooting guard, which is probably his most natural position at 6'6". But he could also, actually 6'8", but he could also dribble the ball. He was a great ball handler, so he could play point guard. He was very quick, so he can defend small forwards. He was powerful, so he can defend power forwards, and he could jump out of the sky, so he was also oftentimes defending the tallest player. So it didn't matter who was guarding him or who he was guarding. It was literally unstoppable. And he was projected to be the #1 pick. He had offers to go to Indiana, DePaul, the Illinois. The world was at his feet. And at that time, all kids who wanted to go to the big show, the dance, the NBA, had to go to at least 1 year of college before going to the NBA. So he was trying to decide in the fall of 84 where he was going to go to school. And just like any, day, he left the school campus to go out to lunch midday with his girlfriend. He had a baby who he had a baby with. They were talking about some issues related to their relationship. And absentmindedly, the story goes, he bumped into another kid, another 18-year-old Black teenager on the South Side, Billy Moore. And Billy Moore was having a bad day, and a 6'8", 220 guy bumps into you, and Billy, not 6'8", not 220, felt threatened in that interaction and pulled out a gun and shot Benji twice. Once in the back and once in the groin. And Benji lay on the streets on the South Side, bleeding to death. It took about 30 minutes for the EMS to arrive, and they took him to the nearest hospital, which was St. Bernard's, which is like 2 miles from here. And unfortunately, there was no blood or limited amount of blood. There was no trauma surgeon. And when the surgeon arrived 4 hours later, Benji sadly died that night. And that led to a change in policy that the most severely injured people, if they're brought by Chicago Police Department, Chicago Fire Department, EMS, they have to be brought to a designated trauma center. An individual can do whatever they want in their own private vehicle, but if you got picked up by EMS after a bad car accident or stab wound or gunshot wound, you have to be taken to a trauma center. That is important because that change in policy relates to another 18-year-old Black male teenager, Damian Turner. Damian Turner, 18-year-old community activist on the South Side, lived 4 blocks from where I'm sitting. I'm sitting right above the emergency department for adults right now, and 4 blocks away, sadly, a kid who was advocating for social change and rent control on the South Side, wise beyond his years, was shot and transported because UChicago had closed their adult trauma center in 1989, and Michael Reese had closed their trauma center in 1991. He was transported to the nearest next trauma center, which was Northwestern. He arrived at Northwestern 30-something minutes later, and he had died. And the next day, his mom said that this happened January 10th of 2010. August 15th of 2010, August 15th, 2010. So that's significant number of years, 16 years from when Benji died. And because of the change in policy, instead of coming to UChicago, because we were not a trauma center, he went to Northwestern where he died. His mother the next day said that if UChicago had a trauma center, my son would still be alive. Turns out Damian Turner was a community activist leading a group called Fearless Leading by the Youth. And they coalesced around the idea of developing a trauma center on the South Side. At the time, there were a couple of different options, but UChicago was on the list of possibilities. And it's on the list of possibilities because of this demographic fact. If you look across the city of Chicago, great city of 77 communities, 77 neighborhoods, all very distinct. If you geolocate where shootings happen, this is a Chicago Tribune story from August of 2014, and this has been fairly consistent over time. If you map where the shootings in the city of Chicago happen, they predominantly happen on the west and the south side of Chicago. Very few things happen in the Loop. Very few events happen north of Chicago. And where the trauma centers are located are disproportionately not in the areas where the gunshot wound injuries occur. And notably, back in that time, University of Chicago's Comer Children's Hospital was a level 1 trauma center for pediatric patients. And for Illinois Department of Public Health purposes, pediatric means less than 16. So if you're over 16, you were transported to an adult trauma center, either out west, Advocate Christ, or Mount Sinai, Stroger, or Northwestern. That organization that Damian Turner had led before his tragic death, Fearless Leading by the Youth, as well as a coalition of groups, including faculty, students, community activists, religious groups organized around Trauma Center Now and advocated for Trauma Center South Side, specifically at the University of Chicago, which is the only, as anyone on the call knows, the only academic medical center on the South Side. And I wouldn't be here today without that advocacy and that activism. And it's largely driven by this reality. If you look at where the trauma centers are, the little crosses on this map were where the trauma centers were before the University of Chicago became an adult trauma center. And the deeper reds means greater distance away from a trauma center. And with the advent of the trauma center, this is a slide attributed to one of my trauma faculty, engineer, Dr. David Hampton. This is what things look like now in terms of proximity to an adult trauma center just by the launch of a trauma center at the University of Chicago. You can see that in the far south, there's still a geographic disparity of access to adult trauma center care. But for those who cross the border into Indiana, Northwest Indiana also does not have an adult trauma center or pediatric trauma center. So a significant number and percentage of patients come to us who are most severely injured from the northwest corner of the state of Indiana. This is what we look like April 30th, 2018. No vomit, no blood, no spit, no mess on our crisp white coats. And this group of people were willing to take a chance on an audacious task of standing up an adult level trauma center in a place that hadn't had one in 27 years. I would ride and die with this group of people because they were willing to do something courageous for which success was not guaranteed. May 1st of 2018, the Trauma Center opened, caring for patients on the South Side and their families with compassionate care focused on prevention and recovery. And with our partners, we try to lead in discovery, education, and advocacy. So I wordsmithed this mission statement and visioning statement for the greater part of a year before settling upon these 3 sentences with the express intentionality of having the word community appear twice. Trauma Center is a resource for the communities that we serve. I showed you a picture of the original 7, the Magnificent 7. We're now 17. This is what we look like today because of the incredible growth and volume and adjustment to the realities based on what we know today that I did not know 9 years ago. And in addition to the 17 faculty, we've also trained a growing number of fellows who come here to learn how best to take care of people who are traumatically injured. And this is just a smattering of our current fellows, but I would also add that we're a site for training, and I don't need to belabor this in the context of what's happening at the global level for our military civilian partners with embedded surgeons, anesthesiologists, CRNAs, medics, PAs who have committed to protect our democracy and put themselves in harm's way. And their service, we also try to meet their needs for training and simulation and education so that they can bring back the wounded safely back to their families. And the reason why we've had this tremendous growth is this reality. The projected numbers of trauma patients that we were supposed to see when the Trauma Center first opened in 2018 was about 3,000 trauma patients a year. That's a moderate-sized trauma center across the country. That's moderate size. We see over 6,000, so double that number of trauma patients a year. And you can see the sawtooth pattern reflects the fact that as we enter summer, and for the purposes of Chicago, summer means anything above 50 degrees, our numbers go up. Last night we unfortunately had two victims of gun violence who died, 116, 120 something. And we see an upsurge as the weather is warming. So when everyone else thinks about the summer with summer vacations and Lollapalooza and Formula racing and the lake and food festivals, that's when we bear down and we don't go on vacation, because this is when our work is the most arduous. So with that as a clinical backdrop, why do we see this? And those are the questions that I have been wrestling with for the past 3 decades of my career. And as anyone in this call knows, this equation that I just put up, 8569 equals 8 parentheses 7, is not math, because that doesn't compute. 85 is average life expectancy of folks who lives in Streeterville or the Loop that looks primarily white and rich. 69 is the average life expectancy in Washington Park, which is right across the street from my window, seeing the DeSable Museum. 8 is the geographic distance in miles between those two geographies. 7 represents the number of stops in the L train. Very small distances, very large differences in life experiences, life outcomes, and the quality of one's life. And this fact is not unique to Chicago. You can replicate this in Milwaukee, in Boston, and Hartford, and any city in America. And it's largely driven by the social drivers or the social determinants of health: economic stability, education access, social and community contacts, healthcare access, and neighborhood and built environment. And it's those things that are the root causes or the upstream factors that lead to people being at more risk who happen to live in the South Side than others. And it's trying to tackle those social demographic factors and trying to figure out how can we actually prevent people from being re-injured if they're already injured, or how do we prevent primary injury in the first place? And as a trauma surgeon, we get trained in the middle box. EMS brings a patient to us. We have a choreographed set of interventions, approaches, procedures, trip to the operating room or the interventional radiology suite, stop in the ICU, stop in the wards. Hopefully people then recover, go to rehabilitation, and ideally they get back to where they were functioning before they were hurt. And this is the pathway for car accident, a gunshot wound, stab wound, and an assault. The ideal is if anyone in this call got injured, you'd want the best care possible. You want the rehabilitation that you needed. And ideally, if you enjoy what you're doing today, you'd want to be back doing it again. But we often don't talk about the lived experiences that people have before injury, or the built environment in which people live. And the built environment largely is where people live, work, play, pray, and love every day. And we know that there's stark differences across many parameters: economic hardship index, employment, education, educational access, jobs, and all of these things are hyper concentrated in communities of color in this great city of Chicago, predominantly in the west and the south sides of the city. And how does this manifest with respect to the relationship with firearm-related injuries? Far left screen is economic hardship. By census tract in Chicago, darker is more economic hardship. The middle graph represents life expectancy. Darker represents worse life expectancy, darker blue. And then finally, you can see the correlation or the collinearity of citywide shooting victimization, with the light blue being very low rates and the various shades other than blue representing higher rates of firearm-related injuries. So in many ways, economic exclusion and firearm injuries are correlated. So with that knowledge, what do we do about it? One of the things that was very important to me when I was deliberating about taking this position, which is now a calling for me, was we had to do more than patch people up, street them, and send them on their way, because of my experiences in Boston and Philadelphia and Texas, that without trying to alter that dynamic, people would be back in your emergency department, back in your trauma center with a more lethal injury, and we had to do something with that knowledge. And some great research done by one of my former residents at the Brigham, Bethany Strong, who's now at Shock Trauma Maryland. She did a study when she was in her research years where she looked at University of Maryland's shock trauma in Baltimore's center, and she looked at victims of firearm injuries who were shot once and only once, and what their trajectory was over time. This is over 10 years, versus people who are shot more than once. And not surprisingly, there is a lower survival of people shot more than once. But turns out it's not just because they had a second gunshot wound. Gunshot wounds, on average, short of people getting 15 wounds, like which is what happened, unfortunately, to one of the patients last night, 90%, 95% of people survive. So being shot is not a fatal condition. But what increases people's risk of dying is the social connections and their access to healthcare. And many of these people on the dotted line who died prematurely, it's the context of diabetes, hypertension, renal failure, chronic medical conditions that are not being addressed, because the same thing that leads you to be at risk for being shot more than once, being disconnected from the healthcare system, are the same things that would lead to premature mortality. So with that, over the past 25 years, there's been an evolution of hospital-based violence intervention programs, which basically are designed to wrap around services in that golden moment of trusted relationships with providers, nurses, docs, social workers, etc., to find a common ground for those people who want to reconnect with the healthcare system, reconnect with social services, reconnect. It basically, think of it as a accompaniment to get people on a different path. And in many ways, the ultimate goal is to address the social drivers of health to change the trajectory of people's lives. At UChicago, we call our program the Violence Recovery Program, led by Dwayne Johnson, who's in the bottom graph. And our violence recovery program basically sees every single victim of violence and tries to connect them with services in the community to prevent them from being re-injured. And it's a complex mosaic, right? It's not, petri dishes. It's not restriction, fragment, polymorphisms. It's not segments of DNA. It's not recombinant technology. It's people and communities. And a lot of what we do with our violence recovery program is looks at the ecosystem external to the University of Chicago, hospitals, four walls, and we divide into two camps. One is a lot of work that's evolved over the past decade or more. It goes back a little longer, but it's been more organized over the past decade for street outreach and prevention of secondary trauma through a whole host of networks that are trying to create a community violence injury ecosystem to address the risks of being re-injured in a time-limited way because of retaliation, because of feuds, because of conflicts that get manifested and repeated, kind of like the Hatfield and McCoy problem. And then the other half of that is social services. How can we do better at connecting folks with social services that are existing, but people may not know much about them? And so we, with our violence recovery program, really balance those two large buckets of activities to try to prevent people from coming back to the trauma center. And being in an academic medical center and having lots of resources, we're trying to lead the way by innovative programming. Namely, one of the things that we noted our patients often have is health harming legal needs. They're being evicted, they need a work note, they need other things that are not medical in order to get back on track. And these social determinants often can have a legal solution. And when we queried our patients, 3/4 of our patients had at least one health harming legal need. And so we partnered with Legal Aid Chicago to develop our recovery legal care program, which basically provides connections with our patients who want it with legal services pro bono provided by Legal Aid Chicago to try to close the gap between their needs and their success post-discharge from the hospital. And we got funded initially $1 million from the Department of Justice, followed up with $6 million from the NIH that remarkably has not been cut in the midst of all of the craziness. I said that out loud, craziness, with a pragmatic clinical trial that's trying to scientifically show the validity of this work and its impact in pragmatic clinical trial, comparing patients who look alike, some of whom decide to engage, some of whom who don't decide to engage, to determine the treatment effect. Now, all of that would be naught if we don't advocate. And one of the things that I've been blessed to have the opportunity from the platform of Chicago is I've been able to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee led by retiring Senator Durbin, testify before Congress around gun violence as a public health issue. Without increased advocacy, we will be dealing with the same problems 25, 50 years from now. We need some fundamental changes with how we do things, how we value people in order to meet these needs. And for me, I don't know for those on the call, I actually use the power of the pen and not the sword when something comes across my radar screen that angers me, frustrates me, pisses me off. And I use that pen to tell stories that relate to the things that I have the privilege and sometimes the sadness of encountering in the trauma bay or in the hospital, and advocating largely for change as much as people believe change is possible. And over the past 8 years that I've been here, I have a lot of stories to tell. And I have a book that's being launched this summer, July 7th of this year, where I tell stories as it relates to both facts, narrative, policy about what, at least from this humble trauma surgeon's perspective, we need to do collectively to heal this very tragic, uniquely American problem called gun violence. So in my last few minutes, I want to transition because I don't have any baby pictures, but I have pictures of other people. So, none of us, we all come into this world alone. We all leave the world alone, but along the way, we're defined by the people that we touch. And, Max Claremont, this is his bottom picture, right-hand corner. He's a 16-year-old aspiring doctor. He sees a story about me when I was at the Brigham in Boston. He cold emails me. I'd never had that before. Cold email. Says, "Hey, I am Max. I want to meet you. I've never seen a black doctor before." Max and I go back now 13 years. He graduated from Brown with a BA and MPH, and initially thought he was going to go into medicine. He since has pivoted to focus more on public health. Did some work with Partners in Health, and but he was also my first chief of staff. And when you build meaningful relationships, you never know where those relationships will take you. So that's maxim number one. Maxim number two, always be kind. So I met this woman, Zara Cooper. She was walking the hallways of the Brigham. She was lost. She was there on a cardiology rotation. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. But I stopped for a second to direct her where she wanted to go. And she was there thinking she wanted to be a cardiologist. And I struck up a conversation with her and I said, "Why do you want to do that?" And she said, "Well, I want to make a difference." And I said, surgeons make a difference. Did you ever think about surgery? Again, I don't know why this conversation went this way, but she ended up training at the Brigham in surgery. She is the first Black female full professor at Harvard Medical School and is now the number 2 in the MGB, Mass General Brigham system. Just being kind. Cultivate your ability to mentor others. Mentorship is a tough job, but it's incredibly rewarding. Emily Kyung was contemplating leaving surgery because she just didn't think she fit in. And I said, "Do you think I fit in? Have I ever fit in? What's your passion?" And I don't need to tell you that she's doing great as an assistant professor at MD Anderson, focused on surgical oncology and cancer research. You never know where inspiration is going to strike. So Susan Krakowski, Canadian, who came to Boston to do her master's in public health. She was doing a general surgery training out in Vancouver. And she wanted to be a health services researcher and surgeon. But she also was a mom, a single mom of 2 sons. And she had to make a decision. How am I gonna balance all that stuff? And the simple advice I gave her is maybe you can't do everything now. Pick what you want to do now and then defer the rest. And I think that's the important advice, that sometimes we go on this treadmill. We run really fast and we think all we need to do is run faster. But sometimes you just got to prioritize. What are you going to do now? And what are you not going to do now? I just showed you Susan's picture. Susan's connected to this guy, Murad Hamid. Murad Hamid was her program director, another Canadian, who I had never met. But when Susan was looking for a mentor, he connected Susan with me, and through Susan, I got connected with him, and we've become fast friends. He's now chief of trauma at Stanford, and his big challenge was making the leap to the unknown. His entire training was in Canada. He had done everything at his hospital at Vancouver General, and he was offered the opportunity of leaving that, going to another country. Yes, United States, California, Stanford, and he's doing great. But you got to sometimes be willing to make leaps and not know where you're going to land, how it's going to turn out, but just have faith. I've never shied away from big goals. This woman, Sudha Jayaraman, is all of 5'5" with huge goals. Her focus is global surgery. And when I first met her, I was like, boy, that's pretty audacious. And she's doing it. So small minds don't achieve much. Make audacious goals. You may actually achieve them. And my last 2 slides before I take questions. Anazi Ofildi, also trained at the Brigham. Amazing man who background is he's an academic plastic surgeon who no longer operates. He's taken a different path with healthcare administration, hospital administration, and he serves as a chief strategy officer at Memorial Sloan Kettering, a very important job around networking and growing of service lines, and he's doing a bang-up job. But he's taking a different path than the traditional academic plastic surgeon path. That's how he got trained to do, but that's not what he's currently doing, and he's doing great. And then my final is my partner across the way. So my partner at Strozier, Cook County, Dr. Mallory Williams, was one of my very first fellows. He's the chair of the Department of Trauma and Burn over at John Strozier Hospital of Cook County. And it's such a pleasure to know that someone that you were intimately involved in their training is now your team of rivals. Just kidding. You can't beat us. We're top dog. But I said that out loud. But Mallory is a dear friend and collaborator, and it's just wonderful to see people that you help along the way go on to do great things. So I mentioned at the very beginning, Miles Davis. If you hit the wrong note, it's the next note that lets you know if it's bad or good. On the left is Miles Davis playing saxophone. In the back, you can barely see him, but on piano is who's that in the back and who's in the foreground?
Herbie Hancock, graduate of
Herbie
Hyde Park
Hancock.
High School.
There you go. So Herbie has the last word.
So in the middle of Miles's solo, when he was playing one of his amazing solos, and I'm trying, I'm in there and I'm playing. Right in the middle of his solo, I played the wrong chord. A chord that it just sounded completely wrong. It sounded like a big mistake. And I did this and I went, oh, like this. And I put my hands around my ears. And Miles paused for a second. And then he played some notes that made my chord right. He made it correct, which astounded me. I couldn't believe what I heard. Miles was able to make something that was wrong into something that was right with the power of the choice of notes that he made and the feeling that he had. And so I couldn't play for for about a minute. I couldn't even touch the piano. But what I realize now is that Miles didn't hear it as a mistake. He heard it as something that happened, just an event. And so that was part of the reality of what was happening at that moment. And he dealt with it. He found something that, since he didn't hear it as a mistake, he felt it was his responsibility to find something that fit. And he was able to do that. That taught me a very big lesson about not only music, but about life. We can look for the world to be as we would like it to be as individuals, make it easy for me, that idea. We can look for that. But I think the important thing is that we grow. And the only way we can grow is to have a mind that's open enough to be able to accept situations, to be able to experience situations as they are and turn them into medicine, turn poison into medicine. Take whatever situation you have and make something constructive happen with it. That's what I learned from that situation with Miles.
Take whatever situation you have and make something constructive happen with it. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
You have a
I
couple.
put a check question in the chat because I have construction going on here.
Can someone modulate and send me the question or read the question?
Sure. It says the first question says, "Hi, Dr. Rogers. Appreciate your info. I'm a filmmaker and have a movie that speaks to the relationship of food insecurity and violent crimes. Please speak to the statistic for every 1% increase in food insecurity, violent crime rate rises by 12%."
Yeah, there's a great point. And that I don't see who gave that question. DM, but
That
DM.
was me, Daryl Manuel.
Yeah, Emmanuel. Thank you so much. That the point's well taken. Uh, at the core, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have safety, we have food, we have shelter. Without those things, it's pretty hard to feel safe. And there's both food as medicine, but food as sustenance. And the marker of being food insecure, otherwise known as hungry, is a significant risk factor for gun violence. This is one of those where it's hard because just giving someone a meal doesn't solve their hunger problem. May solve it for the minute, but not for the duration. And similarly, giving someone a healthcare card doesn't give them health care. So
Hmm.
I'm completely in agreement. I think that these are some fundamental problems and not making a political statement, but when we start attacking supplemental nutrition for families, supplemental nutritional assistance program, otherwise known as food stamps, to families and people and women with kids and kids, we really start doing harm to our society.
Right, right. And that's what bugged me and made me want to write this movie because it makes us look like something's wrong with us. Why are we so violent? Why are we even think that about ourselves? But when you add these external forces that you really, highlighted others, it's like, well, we're not that violent. Perhaps we are just going along with a script that somebody provided for us. And would we change if we knew that was what was happening? And that was the premise of me why I wrote this movie. So could miss your
Look
other.
forward to seeing it out in the world.
Mhm.
Next question is, I think of Raj Chetty and the analysis of Move to Opportunity. Have you or others looked at housing and or helping move folks out of neighborhoods where there may be more likely to be repeat victims of violence? Short answer to that is yes. One of the things that the Violence Recovery Program assesses is safety. Do you feel safe to discharge from the hospital? Um, it's a double-edged sword or challenge in that there's so many assets that people have in their neighborhoods, especially intergenerationally. Someone to help take care of your kid. You know the place like the back of your hand. It's part of your DNA. Taking people out of their environments to someplace else for safety has its own risk-benefit calculation. But some people clearly feel the safest thing they can do is get out of Chicago. And we have seen a mass migration out versus in of Black population, especially in the city of Chicago. And there's lots of concerns of increasing gentrification of some neighborhoods that are pushing Black community members in particular out. I don't have enough data about what happens in predominantly Hispanic neighborhoods like Pilsen or back of the yards. I don't know if anyone on the call can comment. Uh, Let me make sure I got the questions in order. This was Dr. Rogers, this was a touching presentation in regard to the lack of a level one trauma centers around Chicago. Have you come across suggestions to upgrade level two centers to level one or to build entirely new level one? The short answer is yes. There's been a push to potentially find ways to get a level two more south, like in the Harvey area. level 2 or level 1. One of the challenges, as everyone on the phone on the call knows, is that it took 27 years of advocacy to relaunch the Trauma Center here at the University of Chicago. Um, I would make the same statement that Northwest Indiana should also have a level 1 in that corner of the state. It takes a lot of advocacy to do that. And one of the things that we do know is trauma centers aren't always where they need to be. In your experience, how can healthcare systems better partner with community organizations to prevent trauma before it happens? That is what keeps me in Chicago. We got to do a better job of primary prevention. As I'm sitting here giving this talk right at noon, a 30-year-old man was shot multiple times and in traumatic arrest. And as I'm giving this talk, 15 minutes later, another 30-year-old man was shot in the right chest. This is unacceptable, intolerable, but we make it acceptable, but we make it tolerable by not speaking out against it. Because too much of the narrative is bad people doing bad things to bad people who deserve it, which is way not the truth. And we need to find ways of changing the narrative, accepting the systems that put people at risk, and changing those systems. I love the question. What can we, I love that, what we do as U Chicago staff members to support these efforts? I encourage you to come by the Trauma Center, meet our violence recovery specialists and team. There's lots that we can do. Right now, outside of our offices, we have a clothing drive because when people come in, God forbid any of you ever come in after a car accident, the first thing we do is cut your clothes off. Not to embarrass you, we cut your clothes off because we got to examine you quickly to make sure you don't have any penetrating wounds, injuries that we have to do something about. It's the E, exposure. Well, when we cut your clothes off, how do you get home, especially in 30-degree weather or 2-degree weather? And so there's so many different ways to serve, and there are times when simply just volunteering for someone who is blue down in the hospital and sitting with them and talking to them, listening to their story. There are lots of ways, big and small, to make people be seen, be heard, be valued.
Also, I think I'd ask that question. Thank you so much. And if I recall, there is like a violence recovery program, like fund, where people can donate to that. I learned about this program a few years ago, and I was fortunate to be in a leadership program at the university. And we had to choose a cause we would fundraise for. That's the one I chose, and I presented, and they voted on it and went with it. So I felt really good about being able to contribute in that way. But I thought about since, is there anything else that can be done? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the other things is we often focus on just the person who shot. There's nothing wrong with focusing on that, but the ripple effects of that one victim are tremendous. Their mama, their grandmama, their cousin, their siblings, their friends, their close contacts. And it affects everyone differently. And one of the things that I've been grappling with is how do we better meet the needs of the circle of people in that person's life, but also even for that individual, how do we address the non-visible things, meaning their mental health, psychological health, social connections? Because it's easy to see a broken bone or a bleeding vessel. It's hard to see a depressed mind, a sad state, a suicidal state, a post-traumatic stress disorder state. And sometimes I say, I don't even say it's post-traumatic stress because there's no post. Our warriors, fighters, soldiers in Iran, when they come back, they will no longer be in Iran. They'll be on US soil with their families. And so whatever trauma they experience is post. But what if you're still in the present, surrounded by trauma? Is there such a thing as the present traumatic stress disorder? I surmise that there is. What do we do about that?
I came with a term, generational PTSD, that it seemed like we go through because it's been happening over generations.
Yep.
And so we're still dealing with it. And it's, as you said, it's not as simple as a post PTSD or whatever, but that was, generational PTSD, and how are we dealing with that? So, something to that.
Well, I want to be respectful of time. I can give you 5 minutes back, or we can keep taking questions. I'm yours. Whatever you want me to do, Miss Willis.
Do we have any more questions? Do we have any more questions? Did someone say yes?
I don't think so. Not yet.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. That was a wonderful presentation. Definitely different, but so wonderful. We appreciate you on the South Side for sure. Even though I'm in Texas, I'll put that out there.
Yeah.
But definitely,
That
thank you.
manual said edible eats on Tubi. Is that your
Yes, it is.
okay,
Yes, it is.
edible EDIBL eats on Tubi.
ATS.
ATS.
Yes.
Right.
And I would love it, Miss Willis, if I could send you a link on your a matter of discussion, kind of in the same vein. It would be my pleasure. So I would love to send you a link, and if you see it's appropriate, some merit, I'd be glad to set up a discussion about it and a screening. And Dr. Rogers, I would obviously like for you to take a look because I think it's all in the same vein. When I wrote this movie, I took on a zombie motif because when I was watching the zombie movie, it was like, watch out over there. Or I saw some zombies, they got somebody. Well, when I walk down this street, I walk in the middle. I said, well, that don't sound like a zombie. That sound like my neighborhood. When I'm in my neighborhood going outside and walking around. So that correlation made me to write this movie, a comedy, action, horror movie. Because at its very core, what's going on out here is a horror movie in real life.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your time and your attention. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Bye-bye.